Hello, I'm Stephen David Simon, Executive Director of the City of Los Angeles Department on Disability. Our department works to advance accessibility, equity, and inclusion for people with disabilities across Los Angeles. We support citywide compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA, provide services that remove barriers to participation, and help people with disabilities fully engage in civic life, whether online, at work, in public spaces, or during emergencies. This year marks the 35th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Signed into law on July 26, 1990, the ADA remains as the landmark civil rights law that affirms the rights of people with disabilities to access employment, education, public services, transportation, and more without discrimination. It changed the way we build our cities, deliver services, and protect civil rights. As part of this anniversary, we're proud to recognize the people who helped make this moment possible by making this movement visible. And one of those people is Tom Olin. Tom is a documentary photographer who has captured the heart of the disability rights movement for over 4 decades. Known for his backwards cap and camera always in hand, Tom has documented powerful moments in disability history, from the Capitol crawl to grassroots actions across the nation. His journey to document our communities began in the 1980s while working in a rehabilitation hospital in Michigan, and later as a personal care attendant in the Bay Area. Tom turned to photography to help tell stories of struggle, both literal and figurative. Ever since, he has been capturing national protests, local organizing, and everyday life, helping make the disability rights movement visible to the world. Tom's work has been featured in magazines, documentaries, museums, and galleries around the world. He's also traveled across country for months at a time on more than one occasion with the Road to Freedom bus tour and the ADA Legacy Project, using his lens to promote civil rights and advocate for the Americans with Disabilities Act and its fulfillment. And today we're honored to speak with him directly. Tom, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, I'm so glad to be here. LA has a part of a heart, part of my heart is there. I learned a lot. Like you said, I had some work up in the Bay Area. That's where I actually learned photography. But I was also an attendant at a couple of places, including the Disability Students Union at Berkeley, one of the first attendant services run by people with disabilities. But and I moved from there. I moved to Berkeley because I thought that's where the movement was. Or was still happening. I mean, it definitely had a lot of roots from the 504 to the independent living movement. But when I got there, it's kind of, everyone kind of solidified. And I heard that a new chapter of a disability organization, California Handicap Association, or CAP, whatever that was, and a new one was happening in LA, and I went down and it was amazing. Paul Longmore, Doug Martin, Barbara Waxman, Diane Coleman, Carol Gill. I mean, I could go on and on. There was just and everyone was getting together, and so I definitely loved. There's a part of me that just loves LA. I'm so glad to be here with you.
Well, we really appreciate that. I want to explore a little more of your sort of background and getting involved in the work and really making it your life's work. So, I mean, what really drew you to documenting individual lives to then evolve into really a catalyst for a movement?
Well, when I was, I mean, it's kind of really funny. I look back at the really when I was, in my teens and in my 20s. When I looked at, I only had very 110 camera, things that wasn't that very professional at all. But there was a lot of I could see, myself in some of those photos later on with my professional cameras. And in LA, my first subjects were some of my, I was an attendant going, and also going to community college, and had a 35 millimeter class. And so my subjects were some of my people that I was being an attendant to, and it was very important. One of the first ones was actually a lady that had environmental illness, and that was a group of people that kind of liked me because I did not put on very fancy deodorants, or I didn't smell that way. And so, but in that Bay Area, there was a group, and especially Ellen, who I was taking pictures of. I told a story, and I kept on. That was kind of part of things that I always did. I was a storyteller, and it came out in my photos. And so it was easy to, and because from my early days in the rehab unit and beyond, I mean, my disability is dyslexia. So I had this history of being able to look at what happened to me, which was, I was in a dummy class. We called it the dummy class because I was a slow reader and things like that. And so, I got to see that kind of way how people looked at other people, and that kind of discrimination affected me, throughout my life, and to finally to the point where, after seeing people in a rehab unit, and how families treated and how friends treated people with disabilities, that's how I kind of came up to be able to tell stories and be able to actually, one of the neat things about being a photographer is, if you want to, you can be close to a person because you are close already, photographing that person. And I was always able to be friends, and that was, and that meant that I really, when I was taking pictures, I was, it could be very emotional. I love people. I think that's very important.
No, certainly. Well, your pictures certainly tell stories, particularly when they're in series, and you just spoke about sort of visible and invisible disabilities and how important it is to get those stories out there. And again, your photography has become truly iconic in this space. So I'm curious, for you personally, is there a particular photo that stands out for you that's especially meaningful to you, just personally, or you feel has been particularly impactful on the movement as a whole?
They're all it's not, the impact is more how I love what other people look at. One of the things I did in the LA County, I worked actually with LA Unified as a teaching assistant. I tried to go to college, and they didn't have any programs for people with dyslexia, so I couldn't finish. I ended up one semester in Northern Michigan University, and so I couldn't be a teacher. Yeah, although in high school I thought I was going to be. I was in Future Teachers America, or whatever, Future Teachers, and but in LA, I got to still be, in that area as a assistant, and did a lot of special ed. And there were times at when I had a binder that had a lot of my photos, and when I went to different schools, I would take that. And I remember one elementary school, the kid was and they asked me to be one-on-one for a week, and so it was like the only went to the elementary school. There was one kid that I had that used a wheelchair. They're the only one that had a wheelchair in the whole school, and I remember being able to have that binder and show him the pictures, and it was so. He looked at pictures, and here's one of the pictures. I had about 100 people in wheelchairs, protesting and on the line, and he just like looked at it and looked at me and said, "I didn't know there were more than 100 people in the whole world, in chairs." I mean, this is like he had no this is back in the 80s, and we weren't on TV a lot. We weren't, in media a lot. And he was just so aghast that there was other people. And then he turned the page, and there was we had a protest up in San Francisco, and Time magazine called the Adapt people wheelchair warriors, and he looked at that headlines and it said wheelchair warriors, and he looked up at me and had its biggest smile. It's he could be, it's something that he could be a warrior. It was I think what I love what the reactions people get from that, how people look at that. I actually I don't have a lot of it. Oh, this is really a great photo. I don't have any of those photos around me. It's all for that effect. One of the venues, I don't know if you remember back that we had in in elementary school, and when I was growing up, and also in the 80s, they were still there, called the Weekly Reader, and school systems had that for topical news and things like that, and I got to have pictures in that, and I know it's the first time that the pictures of people with disabilities as strong as powerful people, and not the Jerry Lewis photos and ways how people looked at media back then. And it was usually a person with a disability, or you're supposed to pity that person, and definitely my pictures weren't, you weren't going to pity a person either, I was around some really strong disabled people that you didn't pat their heads, they might bite you, or whatever. You don't, it's just a way that I got to show our community in a way that had never been done before. That was what I was enjoying to do.
Absolutely. I mean, so much around art and advocacy is raising that awareness. And I think, traditionally think about it in terms of raising awareness for the general public. But even in some of the stories you just told, a lot of it is raising awareness within our own communities, so people can actually sort of see themselves, represented. That said, I'm curious if there are sort of moments, big or small, in disability advocacy, in the movement, that you've witnessed or been part of or photographed that most people may not know about, right? They're not the Capitol crawl. It's not, the signing of the ADA, but where are some of the small things that you need to continue perhaps to raise awareness on?
Well, let me tell you first about one that was even more amazing and powerful, is that people don't really have the history of and we don't have it in our history. And that's during the Olmsted. One of my favorite things was when Elaine and Lois were at the Supreme Court during that case. I remember sleeping outside on the sidewalks. I always brought up a really big queen size airbed to blow up and sleep on those sidewalks. I mean, I always like to be comfortable, and there was always a room for another person to lay down. But that was 1999, and 2 weeks after that court case, ADAPT and came to town, to DC, with and they had organized a rally and a march to the Supreme Court. And what was the most amazing thing about it was that there were 4,000 people there. That's the largest march ever, and together in demonstration, march, whatever, rally you can call in our history, but people don't really know too much about it. We had over 150 organizations that came. There were I don't know how many buses that were driven in. There were so many people that in wheelchairs coming down from New York City that they had to gut a Amtrak train just to get all the wheelchairs in. So there's a lot of history we don't know about. We don't put a lot of energy or money or whatever to get that out there, and it's really, really important. A couple of weeks ago, I was with a group. There's around the United States, every state has a youth component. California has a really good one. But I was with a whole bunch of, they had a conference here in Arizona, and I participated, and the young people just really want the history, and it's important to them. So it's something going off. I can't remember what we're talking about.
No, you're fine. You're talking about exactly what we want to talk about, and I want to sort of guide us into sort of back into the policy side of this conversation, right? We're talking about the art and the movement, but the ADA is 35 years old, right? That's why we're here today. It's this conversation we're having. How did the passage of the ADA change the landscape for people with disabilities, as a in the moment and then sort of over time? And where are we now?
It's what's interesting is that before the ADA, it was really easy to organize people because there was so much access problems we had around. I love having. I always when it comes to that, I always like to. I mean, we didn't have curb cuts at one point. And one of the worst curb cut places was the Walk of Fame in Hollywood. Those curbs, you could not, a lot of times, if you're in a manual chair, you could, kind of bump up the curbs, jump up on them. These were like 10 inches tall. You couldn't do that. And we had a demonstration. We were planning a demonstration about a week or 2 weeks before the demonstration on the Walk of Fame. We had a person, in a chair that what you had to do back then is go from alley, find an alley to the street so you could get into the street, go down to the corner in the street, and then cross over to the other side, and then find another alley. and it's really dangerous. And that person that was doing it 2 weeks before actually got hit and was killed. So it was just like, oh, things like that were happening. But we had our little demonstration called the Walk of Shame. And we had built little ramps, at the corners and things like that. And people came because they were pissed off. They wanted that kind of access. We had, and like I was telling you, I had a youth conference that I participated in. And I always tell them, hey, all the movement started with students, it was young people, and I tell that today, it's you all, it's easy for you to get around now. It's back then, everyone is kind of pissed off. We come together because we're all pissed off together. No one's really pissed off together except nowadays. Now we're losing. There's a really chance that we're losing a lot of the ADA and enforcement. In fact, there is no enforcement anymore unless it's going to be local. The DOJ is there is no civil rights office for people with disabilities. You might have the name, but there's no staff. It's really, right now, it's really important that we're, talking about the ADA because it has always been something that has brought the movement on and put more people in it, and being able to go to get around, which means going to universities, going to jobs. It's has been incredible important for us, and now we have the tendency that without that, we had more people that were in institutions, and if you don't have accessibility, you end up either in the institution or staying in an institution. And I'm feeling that we're going back to that era where institutions are more important, because accessibility is not on the front burner as we all want. Right now, we're all like trying to scramble to find the money to have the programs to further accessibility.
Well, one thing that particularly stood out in that last arc of this conversation is in asking about sort of the impact of the ADA on American society. You started by pointing out that pre-ADA, it was essentially easier to organize, right? And to get activists out there. Talk a little further about where we're at today. I mean, do you feel now that there is more access to education and jobs and so on, it's harder to galvanize community and activism?
Yeah. And one of the reasons is that we don't all collectively talk with each other anymore. And that's something that, here we have all the social media. We had that kind of, connection, but that is not the same as eye to eye, hand to hand kind of communication. We had telephones back then. We still do, but we don't, our first thing is going to text that person, or whatever. But that when it comes to what your group is doing or this group is doing and that group is doing, we don't have that kind of communication where we used to have magazines, really nice, great, amazing magazines. Those magazines, mainstream out of California, we had Disability Rag out of Memphis. We had the Mouth magazine out of Rochester, and those kept us, our community, talking, knowing what each other was doing. The fight for the ADA. Most people knew what was happening month by month, here we have, to find out what's happening in our community, national community, state community. We have to go to so many websites to find out, what they're doing. Who's going to, I don't go to that many websites every day to find out what's happening, and definitely mainstream media, or even, some of the alternative Substack media and stuff like that. Still, we're not talked about, so it's a hard one. It's a really hard one, not only to organize, but to even find people to organize, or how do we come together? I mean, that's an issue I think we're all trying to, figure out right now.
Yeah, I mean, you've spoken about youth. You've referenced that a few times here, and you just talked about, right, sort of the changes in technology and how we communicate. I'd argue you're sort of the preeminent archivist of this movement, right? Your photography captures decades of this work. Are you feeling it's getting to this new younger generations? Are people able to access your work, and is the message still there? And are there efforts we can make together to help sort of build out that message for new generations?
I think it's a lot of young people know my photography more than I would, I assume, but and it's probably our programs, the DI programs, and all the things that are not going to be around, or we have to fight to have them around. A lot of young people do get a lot of the images, the photos, but then what comes after that is something else, and we don't have. What I'm seeing is that there's a lot of old leaders out here. A lot of people. It's amazing how many people that were in the demonstrations and everything are now, still directors, and also other people that or parts of leading of other organizations. But there's no ladders that young people can come up and be a part of. It's a hard one, and the there's now a lot of intergenerational talking. And, I consider myself an elder, and I don't lead any organization, but I belong to a lot of organizations. I have a lot of mentees, which I really think are very, very important for anyone who is older and have gone through a lot and have a lot to offer. You should always have some young people that you're talking with. But it's a pathway from our young people to to leading our organizations that I think that's as important as anything else right now, and how we do it. Having. I see a lot. One of the things I also see that I think is something that we all have to work on is how we treat each other, especially within our community. I have seen people in organizations not working with other people, and actually having not being able to work with each other. And that kind of means a whole bunch of other things. I don't even know how to say it, and I don't want to get so negative that way. But we have a lot of negativity and it doesn't help us at all. So it's something that we we have to look at, what makes us, and, or what our values are, our shared values, and sometimes our shared values, and it's not the same. And it's, I'm getting off on too many things right now.
No, not at all. I mean, as you pointed out, we're struggling. Enforcement is an issue. We here in the local space are really trying to lead in partnership with other cities and really keep the movement alive. So we're at the 35th anniversary. It's 3+ decades of the ADA being signed into law. And I'd ask, is there a specific, particular message you want the city of Los Angeles and our sister cities across the country to reflect on about the spirit of the ADA and this movement that made it possible?
I think we all have that spirit of the ADA. The thing is, and I think you bring up the most important part, is the part where we have to enforce that, and how cities are doing, because the feds are not going to do it. The feds have cut off. We usually have in our state the PNAs, the Protection and Advocacy, which is Disability Rights California. They're losing their funding. So who is going to protect us? That's I think what we all have to figure out, and it comes down to it's going to come down to our local people, and our local, the who in LA counties can enforce this. How can we do this? Because we can't do it. We had, Disability Rights California. I think one of the bigger lawsuits that they had was the LA Unified and District. Now they're not going to be able to do that. They're not going to be able to, look at anything that crosses the ADA. So that's going to be a good one to figure out. Yeah.
No, I mean, I appreciate it. I mean, we're going to wrap in a minute here. This has been an extraordinary conversation for me. I consider myself an elder in this space as well, but I'm learning from you. Your art continues to just be extraordinary. It is the storytelling that we need to keep our history intact in a space where we're sort of under attack. So I thank you for sharing your story, your insight. You shared your art with us. We'll do everything we can to keep the visibility, to support that work and get it in more people's hands, if you will. You've done this work for decades, and helping people experience the movement through your lens, I think, is going to be life-changing inside our community and externally. So I will say to our audience to explore a portion of Tom Olin's photo collection and learn more about how the city of Los Angeles is commemorating the ADA 35th anniversary milestone. Please visit the Department on Disability's website at disability.lacity.gov, or follow us on social media throughout the month of July. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Tom. I really hope this is just the beginning of conversations. We have more together. It's a true pleasure to have spent this time with you. Thank you again so much on behalf of the city and our communities for the work that you do. And really, please continue doing it. Thank you again.
Thank you, Steve.